So we wanted to understand how fragmented Switzerland is in terms of the energy market, and particularly the regulation concerning rooftop solar photovoltaics, because this specific sector plays a major role in the energy strategy of the Federal Council. And generally, fragmentation slows down transition. So we really want to understand how big is that transition and what might be the potential effects.
In the Swiss federal system, the cantons, but also the municipalities, have ample leeway in implementing and introducing their own policies. So the main outcome is really a policy landscape of what cantons, municipalities, but also the federal level do in Switzerland to promote the deployment of renewable energies. And this, of course, informs also about variation, but also best practices or innovation potential. Well, while the federal structure actually opens room for cantonal innovation, but also for minimal standards, so both directions, we see that the latter is especially a challenge. Horizontal coordination that we have only produces legally non-binding standards in Switzerland, and so cantons can decide not to implement these standards. And this is not necessarily a problem, but at the same time, we know that ambitious energy policies often fierce political opposition. And so it's not politically always attractive to introduce them. And I see the combination of this institutional structure and the nature of these policies as a very crucial challenge for the implementation of effective policies.
The extreme fragmentation that we identify in the paper is somewhat problematic. In Switzerland, we have over 600 distribution utilities, which all have their own rules. If you compare that to Germany, a country about 10 times the size of Switzerland, there are about 850 there. So we're much more fragmented. And that makes the market for third-party offers of photovoltaics very unattractive, but it also makes it hard for households to take investment decisions. On top, I wanted to say that there is no real market design, actually, because we don't have a liberalized electricity sector in Switzerland. If we had one, then the fragmentation would also by far not be as high.
So what we did is we developed a coding scheme for cantonal policies based on literature and previous research. And then we basically collected data on the 26 cantons and tried to code the existing instruments according to this scheme. The purpose of this coding is to have comparable data, which means that we can then compare and group cantons according to what they do or what they do not do. One of the main findings is that this structure I was talking about before, which is associated with non-binding standards, leads to a situation where a majority of the cantons uses this leeway to go for low ambition regulation rather than far-going regulation. And I can give you a few examples. For example, in the Mucken, this is one of the informal instruments that the cantons have to coordinate their policies. There is a standard saying that on new buildings, there should be a requirement for solar PV. And this rule, if you want, this non-binding rule, has been in these Mucken for several years. But what we see in the A figure in this graph is that still a considerable group of cantons has not implemented this standard in the cantonal policies. And then the national regulation also allows cantons to be more restrictive or less restrictive with respect to solar PV and whether there is a building permit required. And what we see here, and this is the panel B and C, is that most cantons do not open the scope for PV installation not requiring a building permit. That's what we see in the B panel. And on the other hand, almost all cantons use their leeway to identify further protection zones, so to be more restrictive as the minimal standard at the federal level would require them to be. A second important finding, however, is that there is some indication that there are cantons that use their leeway to be more promotive. And we see that with respect to the subsidize, which is normally a national program to subsidize as a one-shot payment the installation of PV on buildings. And interestingly, we see, even though this subsidies are not part of such a harmonized agreement between the cantons, there are some cantons who go beyond federal subsidies and add additional money to be actually more promotive than required. And this also reflects in the right-hand graph, where you see that the expenditures or the money cantons spend on energy, on the building level, varies quite considerably. So we see that really the cantons have different ambition maybe to be more active in that field.
So we built a model to estimate the economic attractiveness of rooftop installations on households in Switzerland. And to that end, we looked at every single municipality and calculated the so-called internal rate of return, IRR, which is an indicator for the economic attractiveness. And what you can see here are some of the results. This is a single family house that's still heating with gas. And you can see various different colors. So the colors indicate whether this is economic or not. Gray areas mean this you would lose money on your investment, whereas dark blue means you still don't make a great return. You'd better invest that money into other things. And the lighter it gets, except for the gray parts, the better. So there you can make quite a decent return. And you can see that this is quite different throughout Switzerland. All of the situation improves when you go to a multifamily home, because there is more electricity own demand, which saves energy cost, or if you add a heat pump, which also increases the own demand of generated PV. So what really surprised me was the fact that fragmentation doesn't affect only electricity prices or the feed-in tariffs you get for photovoltaics, but it's really across the board. Taxation, rules how to implement PV, and so on. It's really across the board. What also surprised me is how big the differences are between the municipalities in terms of the feed-in tariff.
To get the energy transition done quickly, we need ambitious policies and regulations. And to get them, I think we need binding high ambition standards at the federal level.
Like in the short term, Switzerland should implement minimum tariffs for feed-in that guarantee that PV is economically attractive in every single municipality. In the midterm, I think we have to really get rid of this fragmentation. And one way to do that is, of course, the electricity market liberalization.
I now really talked about top-down regulation and policies, but what is even more important, to also have the bottom-up pressure, that is the population that requires the energy transition to be done.